I'm here in this conversation with Rav Dovid Miller, who is a Rosh Yeshiva at Yeshiva University and the Rosh Kollel of the Gruss Kollel in Yerushalayim, and a Rebbe of mine, a very, very personal and important and very impactful Rebbe of mine. I had the opportunity, the privilege to learn in the Gruss Kollel for a year. And I think we learned Hilchos Nida. I think I learned Hilchos Nida that year together with Rebbe, and really has been one of the highlights of my life. We were just talking about. So we're going to be discussing today the last chapter, actually, of section 1 of the book, part 1 of the book, and this chapter is called "Is God Too Perfect?" And the basic idea, just to quickly summarize, of this chapter is to talk about what I look at as, or other people have talked about as, the difference between the God of the philosophers and the God of the Torah. And the difference being essentially that the God of philosophy is a being who is removed, who is transcendent in a sense that there's a distance that is insurmountable, and it is a God that is completely unknowable, etc. The God of the Torah affirms all of those things, as I understand it. The way that Yiddishkeit and Judaism and our tradition understands it is that all those things are true, but then yet somehow there is this miraculous leap that takes place in which that unknowable, transcendent being decides to reveal himself. And in that revelation, through acts in this world and through Torah and through interaction with mankind, that God chooses to become immanent, chooses to become knowable in some way, shape, or form, chooses to become to enter into relationship with humans, and the idea and the importance of this in the context of everything that that Judaism really is about that relationship with Hashem. So, Rebbe, I'm very curious to hear what your reflections are on this. And I had asked Rebbe to choose a chapter, and this was one that Rebbe chose. So I'm curious to hear why.
I chose a chapter because I think that it comes to the core of what it means to be a Jew, to be a Tselem Elokim. That we speak about man being created in the image of God, and yet when you speak about the gods of the philosophers, how can possibly man, who is so finite and so dependent, be in any way interconnected with God, have a relationship with God? And certainly, how can he reflect God in his essence? It's very interesting that in your book in general and in the chapter, we know that within Judaism we have a more Hasidic approach to viewing man, and we have a more Litvisha approach, a more objective, if you want to, approach that we use tremendously in learning. And you use the Baal Shem Tov as as the mentor in terms of Hasidut, and in terms of the literature approach, you generally quote Rav Soloveitchik, who is the 20th century as opposed to the Baal Shem Tov from the 18th century. But there was a contemporary of the early Hasidim, namely Reb Chaim Volozhin, who I think can serve as the transition and who brought me into this realm of your chapter. The Reb Chaim Volozhin lived at the time that the Hasidim were making tremendous inroads into the Jewish people, and his Rebbe, the Gruss, was also very much a Makubal, a Kabbalist, had a sense of the spiritual, mystical aspects of Judaism, and he wrote a small book, Sachakol, four sections to the book, one of which he talks about man, the Tselem Elokim, two of which he speaks about God, and the fourth one he speaks about Torah, namely Kudshabrichu, Oraita, the Israel, Chadhu, and he basically points out that mysticism is a part of Judaism, whether you're a Chassid or whether you're a Mitnaged, and he gives the basis of what are the principles of an approach that looks underneath, looks into the core of everything, and in that approach, I perhaps would have written the book in a different order, although I certainly appreciate the way he wrote it. He begins with man, which is, of course, curious. But when he gets to God in the second chapter, that's where he really speaks about the content of your section. He asks, what does it mean to make a bracha? What does it mean to pray to God? And he points out that in all of brachot, in all of our blessings, we switch person in the middle of the bracha. We start with ata, we speak in second person, and then we move over, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, we move over to third person. That every bracha basically relates to God on two planes. It relates to him as a you, and it relates to him as that which we sort of an I thou, the you, and then there is the objective God who is beyond speech, who is beyond description, etc., the immanent and the transcendent, and that our relationship to HaKadosh Baruch Hu always takes into account both of these aspects simultaneously. I don't know if we would phrase it a paradox because it's the core of God. And so how can it be a paradox if that's where everything begins? But basically, what Reb Chaim Volozhin explains is that Kadosh Baruch Hu in his essence is transcendent, but when he decided to create man and then to create all of the existence, all of the universes, all of the different frameworks, via the tzimtzumim, via his downgrading of his own kedusha to allow for man's creation. In order to do that, he had to take he had to create a relationship. He had to create an immanence about him that we would be able to relate to, and he did it. I think that you hit the core where you spoke about an interdependency. Namely, he did it by creating a world in which everything is dependent upon him, but simultaneously he with a capital H is dependent upon man. I think that something can be called true if we find it the same thought and even the same simile or the same metaphor, both in Chassidut and in Hitnagdut. And the pasuk that we find, Hashem tzilcha al yad yeminecha, that Kadosh Baruch Hu speaks of himself as being our shadow, is spoken of both by the Baal Shem Tov and by Reb Chaim Volozhin in the same concept, namely that Kadosh Baruch Hu made himself tied to man. He created man as a senior partner. That man is not just an individual who reacts, but man is leading, and God is like our shadow. I know that I'm giving away my age if I say that when I grew up, there was an actor, actually a dancer named Fred Astaire, and he had a partner named Ginger Rogers. And one of his famous dances was Me and My Shadow, in which he and Ginger Rogers played that one of them was the leader and the other one had to be the shadow and had no option but to follow the lead of the source of the shadow. And in that respect, to speak about the greatness of God in terms of his immanence, and not just he created a relationship, but he created a relationship where he is dependent upon us to fulfill his will of creating perfection. Namely, he created something that's imperfect, that only we can perfect it. There is no greater gift, I think, of meaning that God could have given to man, other than basically putting all of existence in man's hands. That God is saying, I am tied to you. I am your shadow. I cannot go beyond what you, kiviyachol, allow me to do. And so to end your first section on this note, it very much resonated with me in terms of my my viewing that particular section, that sha'ar, that gateway of to our existence, to it's anything that we do, be it both on the plane of bein adam lamakom, bein adam lachavero, in the interpersonal relationship with God, or the interpersonal relationship with man. It all comes back to the fact that this is our tselem Elokim. This is what God built into us in terms of our souls.
It's incredibly powerful to like actually stop and think about that. At least I think, right? Even though this is we're reflecting on a chapter, I guess, that I wrote, and yet I'm listening and thinking about it again, and I'm being struck by it. To actually stop and think that Hashem chose to have a dependency, an interdependency, at least on some level, upon us to make us senior partner, as Rabbi had said. Is that something we should be trying to think about more? Is that part of the, I guess, the consciousness or the awareness? Like, is there a space, a place within our avodas Hashem that we should be thinking about that in particular, like with a specific focus?
I think that to a large degree, it gives meaning, an additional level of meaning to all of our, I guess we'll call it, to our mitzvot, to everything that we are doing, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has empowered us to be in charge of all that he created. He created everything in order to be able to give us good, give us pleasure, give us a spiritual fullness. But it's something that we have to earn, and the earning, I think, can have a deeper meaning if we're more aware of our role, not just the question of following a rule book, but that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is handing over to us the keys to all of existence. To me, that's something which is awesome.
Right.
I couldn't, even if I were to give my son the keys to the car, I would limit it in all sorts of ways, and point out that at some point I may take them back. But here HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us the keys, knowing that we can fail, and knowing also, and giving us the ability to rebuild ourselves, to do tshuva, to restart, and just having that patience with us throughout these 6,000 years, in which one can see a certain curve and a certain movement. And I think that we're very privileged to live in a world in which you can write such a book, to be honest with you, and in which the book can resonate with so many people who read it, because the angst, the spirituality is in the air, in our era. Namely, it's something that I think that we're capable at this point in human history of being able to look at where we've come from, to look at where we still have to get to, but to realize that we're on a journey in which we're the drivers. I think that's something which is very, very, at least personally, is very meaningful.
Yeah. Is this a message or a focal point that, as let's say for myself, having young children, is this a piece of the chinuch and of the way that we raise our children, to kind of give over this piece of we talk about Hashem being in control of everything, and we talk about Emunah, and that Hashem is, I think that there's from an early age, there's the understanding of Hashem as this all powerful to whatever degree the child understands that. But this piece about Hashem's choosing to hand us the keys to actually be dependent on us, should that also be part of what we give over?
I think that one can give over. Again, everything is dependent upon the maturity of the child. I think that this is certainly that which comes along with da'at, words that one has to be on a certain level of maturity to be able to use it properly. Otherwise, it can be misused. But certainly the fact that God is immanent, that should be very, very much part of our chinuch, that children should feel that they can connect to God, that God is hugging them, and they can hug God, and that God is talking to them, and they can talk to Him. Namely, that the immanence that yes, in terms of to what degree, I don't know necessarily that a small child needs to feel the burden of all of existence on his shoulders, that his act is going to make or break, like the Rambam speaks about, every person should view himself. And so everything is in balance, and the one act that he's going to do is going to keep things moving. I think that's a little too much for a child. Sometimes the Kadosh Baruch Hu, we know, in the Holocaust, children had to mature quickly, and that they had to make decisions that were life-saving, or unfortunately in the other direction. But that's not for a child. I humbly, that's not for us to put the child into. I think that the child should be happy, that and the happiness of the child is feeling that along with his parents, or even more than his parents, he has Avinu Shebashamayim, and Ima Bashamayim, a Shechina, who is nurturing and holding his hand and clapping when he succeeds, and giving him encouragement when he's challenged. That all, I think, is very, very important in terms of what underlies it all. Words that we're at Tzelem Elokim. I would hold off, I think, until the child is mature enough to be able to view that as a privilege, not just as a burden.
Yeah. When Rabbi mentioned before the shift in, maybe in a sense, in like the culture or what's in the air, in our times maybe versus not so long ago even, and becoming more spiritual, or it's a time where something like the book that we're discussing can resonate with people. It reminds me of a story that I think I heard Rabbi say a number of years ago, about when you went to Boston to be with Rav Soloveitchik on Yom Kippur, and getting back, and the questions that you were asked back then. Can I ask you to say that story again? If I don't know if I've always misquoted it, or maybe I got it accurately.
When I was in the Rosh Shir, he always used to speak about the fact that he felt at the time, that he felt at the time that he had succeeded in transferring the intellectual understanding, the conceptual understanding of learning that he had received from his father and from his grandfather to the American modern Orthodox community. But the emotions, the feelings that he felt when he saw his grandfather davening, or when his father learned with him the avoda on the night of Yom Kippur, that he felt he was not able to transfer over, that he had transferred the mind, but not the heart. And so Rabbi Genak and I, who were at that time chavrusis in the Rav Shir, I decided, we went to the Rav and asked, could we spend Yom Kippur with him, and to be able to, maybe we'd be able to experience somewhat of that which he had received as part of his upbringing. Maybe we'd be able to link into it. And he allowed us to come, and he sat us next to him, He insisted that even though we were both Vakrim at the time, that we wear talitot, that we wear a talis, because Yom Kippur is a day of Yud Gimel Midos, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants the Yud Gimel Midos, as you recall, the Gemara speaks about, to be said by a Shliach Tzibur, who is Ma'utar B'talit, and he felt that should be part of our garb at the time, and we spent Yom Kippur on the two, sitting by him on his two, or standing next to him on his two sides. But let's just assume that we were not mature enough to be able to serve as to be the recipients of what we were hoping that he would try to give us, namely that. I must say, I spent Yom Kippur in different settings. One of the settings that I was in Yom Kippur when I was in the yeshiva was davening in the Beis Medrash of the yeshiva on Yom Kippur next to Rav Aaron Lichtenstein Zatzal, and watching him daven, that to me was a more spiritual experience than being in Boston with the Rav, and namely that it's. I guess that the spirituality is something that has to. It's not something that can be taught. It's not something that necessarily one can just link into from wanting it. I think that there has to be something deeper, and I think that the greatness of the Rav was also, if you want to, his immanence also had a certain transcendent aspect to it. He was, I think, just a bit beyond us. While Rav Lichtenstein, we were more able to link into his immanence, so even though certainly in terms of eloquence, the Rav was a master orator, and his words were able to move us. But in terms of the more personal relationship that we were looking for, he was just beyond. We were just too young at the time. Maybe it's a question of age, question of emotional maturity, spiritual maturity. I don't know. We were looking for it, but we weren't able to link into it.
Yeah. I wasn't thinking about this coming into the conversation now, but as we're talking about spirituality, it's reminding me that not when I was in Gruss, but when I was on NCSY Kollel a few years later, and had my son's upshar, and I brought him to Rabbi in Har Nof, and I remember at the time you had just gotten back from a trip to the Far East, I believe. Would Rabbi be able to share with us a little bit about that trip?
When my wife and I got engaged, she said that if at some point in our marital life we would be able to do two things, she would appreciate it very much. One was that she wanted to go on a safari, that she wanted to see nature as HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted nature, not in a zoo, but in its natural environment. And she wanted to go to the Far East to see a different form of human interaction, different society, totally different culture. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu enabled us at a certain point when all of our children got married to do both. We went to South Africa, to Kruger National Park on a safari. I must say, Magad u'Ma'asecha Hashem, that one sees how, without man intervening, HaKadosh Baruch Hu can create systems in which there is tremendous power and strength and interaction, and everything works. Everything work. HaKadosh Baruch Hu simply created that everything should interact in the ideal manner. It's really amazing. And then I asked her if it's okay. I know that she wanted to go to China. Is it okay if we go to India? So she said, why do you want, is that far enough east? So I said, I always wondered why Israelis, after the army, when they go on a trek, Many of them go to South America, but many still go to India, to the gateway of the Himalayas, to Dharamsala and Rishikesh, etc., and they become frum. Something happens to them in India, and I'd like to try and understand what happens to them. Like why would they become frum in India? So my wife said, I can't promise you that that's gonna be what I was looking for, but I'm willing to go with you. So we found a Chabadnik who set us up in Batei Chabad in that area. As we said, we flew into Mumbai and via New Delhi. Then we went north to the area close to where India hits into Tibet and China, the Himalayas, and that's where the Israelis are. That's where the Batei Chabad are. And we simply sat and talked to many Israelis who were coming from a totally secular background or who had been turned off the derech, and were finding their way back. And it to me was very, very insightful in terms of the fact that I could see really that there were three things that were combining. One was the awesomeness of Kadosh Baruch Hu's world in that area of the globe, where a mountain is a mountain, and a valley is a valley, and a raging river is a raging river, and you feel puny. You just feel very, very, very tiny. And the second aspect was the Chabadniks who were there, who were just totally non-judgmental, but giving, just providing everything for individuals, because we're all brothers, and they felt a tremendous love coming from these fellow Jews. That was very powerful. But there was also a spirituality that was in the air, namely that wherever you were, where you sort of you looked and you said, I want to take a picture of this, and then you saw that there was a temple, or there was an Asherah, or there was something that someone had felt spiritually moved in that place, and created a reminder, a monument, something that was there to that he'd be able to communicate with God, and that spirituality that I saw there, I only found in one other place in the world, although Rav Moshe Weinberger told me there's a third place. The place that I found it was in Tzfat. That when you walk in the alleyways of Tzfat, you can feel something. You feel a spirituality. And my wife and I, the year after we were in India, we were up in Tzfat, and I told her, and we went into a restaurant, and there was an individual there sitting with a group of clearly non-religious Jews, teaching them, and I said, just like in India. And when we were in India, it was just like in Tzfat. So when I spoke to Rav Moshe Weinberg, he said that's what one feels also by the kever of Rav Nachman. I always feel that if I want to go to a kever, I have Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. Like, why in the world should I go off to Eastern Europe? But he said that also is a feeling. In other words, that Kadosh Baruch Hu sort of everywhere one can feel spirituality, but there are some places where it's somewhat more embedded. Why? The fact that that's Tzfat, it's barur, that where it's that post Churban, that's where if you want to, the Shechina is waiting in Galut in Tzfat to return to Yerushalayim. That's something which is, it's very, I think it's very, very special. One can understand, the Aris being there, and all the Talmidim of the Ari, etc. But why in India of all places? And so my only understanding is that Avraham Avinu, we know, had b'nei hapilagshim, and he sent them off Kedma. And when we were in Sfat, I had a compass, of course, to know where to daven towards Yerushalayim, and it was due west, namely that when we were in India, that we were due east of Yerushalayim. So maybe Avraham Avinu sent this spirituality via the Bnei Hapilagshim to India. I asked Rav Moshe Weinberger, why, it's in terms of Eastern Europe. So he said that there are a tremendous number of Kedoshim who were buried in that area, and that's why Rav Nachman wanted to be buried there. And we know that the spiritual level of people who were martyred, there is no parallel. And so these are the three areas that I have found that at least two of them I've seen. The third one I'm taking by Eid Echad Neman B'Yisurim. I'm taking from Rav Moshe that is true as well.
Bringing this full circle to the beginning of the conversation we were having, is this what we refer to when we talk about Hashem's immanence? Would Rabbi say that this is the sense of that immanence of Hashem being present in this world, or those experiences in those three places, or anywhere, when a person feels that spiritual sense?
I think that, again, as we speak about Ashan, about the three three points of interconnection between God and man, or three aspects of existence, of Olam and Shana and Nefesh. So in the world of Olam, I think that the immanence of God clearly was meant to be found in Eretz Yisrael, and it was meant to be focused in the Mikdash. And just simply because we're in Golus currently, so we have to find alternatives for the time being, temporarily. But I think in terms of the concept of Olam, in terms of the world of time, then certainly one can. I'm sorry. In terms of Shana, in terms of the world of time, certainly on Shabbos one can sense HaKadosh Baruch Hu's immanence. On Yom Kippur, the concept of Lifnei Hashem, Sukkos, one can certainly feel the hug of the Shechina, Simchas Torah. One can certainly be able to rise Shavuos. I mean, it's that the Jewish calendar is made of these peaks of immanence that one can link into, if one is open to link into them. It's not something which is automatic. It's something that a person has to have that openness. And then the fact that we have a neshama, that we have a nefesh, means that even when we're not at that particular point geographically, or even if we're not in that particular point in terms of the calendar, but we always have the ability to feel HaKadosh Baruch Hu within us. I think it's very, very important that we feel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that we can feel HaKadosh Baruch Hu within us without needing necessarily any external booster shot. That we can feel it all the time. And I think that also, if I'm not mistaken, you wrote in your book that one could certainly see this in a fellow human being, that to view him as a Tzelem Elokim. I saw a very beautiful Perush in the Zohar that it speaks about in the parsha when Miriam unfortunately did not recognize the uniqueness of her brother, of Moshe Rabbeinu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave Musar and says he's an individual Tmunat Hashem Yavit. And so in the Zohar it explains what's Tmunat Hashem Yavit. He could look at a person and see God in that person. He sees where that person is holding in terms of that person's relationship with the HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's something, again, that I think that a person who is spiritually sensitive when I grew up, when I came to Eretz Yisrael, I was told there was someone in Meir Sharm who was able to look at a pot and tell you if it had been nitbal, if it had been immersed in a mikveh or not, whether it was tamei or tahar. I always felt that, okay, I mean, to look at a pot, that's one thing, but to look at a human being and to be able to see where he's holding in terms of his spirituality, that's something that I think that that we should be able to strive to be able to see the essence of the Shekhinah in every other individual.
If a person doesn't naturally feel this immanence, this spiritual feeling and sense, but they want to, and like Rabbi said, it's not automatic, but it's also not something you can just do. How does a person start?
Come to Eretz Yisrael, go to the Kollel. I don't mean it's. I mean it's very serious.
Yeah.
And then from the Kotel follow through to Tzfat. I don't think he has to go to India. I think that he could find it within Eretz Yisrael. Go to Meron, to Rosh. In other words, but I think also that it's Asay L'Charav, that Uknei L'cha Chaver. In other words, I think that this is part of where everyone is. Not everyone has the opportunity sometimes to just get stuck with, doing what he's doing and just, trying to find this spiritually. But I would hope that when we speak about a husband and a wife being spiritual partners, they would help one another to be able to go on this journey. I think that's probably the first. It would be if one could find it there, then it would permeate one's life and permeate one's home, and that would certainly be an ideal place to start if the relationship allows for it. But also, I think that you have found individuals that you view as having helped you to grow, having helped you to look into yourself. That's the Asay L'Charav, and also you write about within the book about experiences that you had with friends who were real friends, and they were there when you needed them. So I don't think necessarily has to be that there is a particular journey, but I think that Chazal gave us the tools by saying Asay L'Charav Uknei L'cha Chaver, and speaking about Eretz Yisrael, even post Churban, as still that Kid Shel Hashaita, the Kid Shel Asid Lavo, and that there are very, very special individuals that I think that can pass over that feeling. I had wonderful. My father Zecher Tzaddik Livracha was a very, very special person. Rav Lichtenstein was a very, very special person. The Rav was a very special person. I had wonderful, wonderful Rebbeim, who each of them in his own way. If they weren't able to give me the spiritual boost that I needed, but they were able to point out that it's there, where like that I should search for it, that it's something that's attainable, that it's something that a person should view as giving his life meaning, in terms of being able to feel that he can relate to what we call Olam Haba, even in Olam Haza.
Thank you so much for making this time to speak with me. It's really such a zchus and a pleasure.
Looking forward to Mirza Hashem, a more personal encounter other than Zoom, and Mirza Hashem, that you should continue your avodas hakodesh chazak ve'ematz.